You remember it perfectly. You were there. You can see the room. You remember the light coming through the window. You remember exactly what they were wearing. You remember the specific words, the exact phrasing of what they said. You've told this story before. You've thought about it late at night. You've used it to explain yourself to other people, to explain yourself to yourself. But here's the thing. It didn't happen that way. Some of what you remember, you invented. Some of it you borrowed from a film you watched once and forgot you seen. Some of it your brain quietly assembled from fragments of 3 different days, 3 different rooms, 3 different people, and presented to you as a single, seamless, coherent memory, complete with emotions, complete with colors, complete with a narrative arc that makes perfect logical sense. And the most disturbing part, you had absolutely no idea. Welcome to Lime Logic. Today we're performing a full autopsy on the one thing you trust more than anything else about who you are, your past. Because the science of false memory doesn't just reveal a quirk in human psychology, it reveals a fundamental flaw in the architecture of identity itself, in how your mind decides who you are, what happened to you, and what it all means. Stay with me, because by the end of this investigation, you will never remember anything the same way again. Let's start with what most people believe. You experience something. Your brain records it, like a camera, like a hard drive. The file sits there, intact, preserved. And when you want to remember it, you press play and watch the recording. That is not what happens. Not even close. Here's what actually happens. Memory is not a recording. Memory is a reconstruction. Every single time you remember something, your brain doesn't retrieve a stored file. It rebuilds the experience from scratch, using whatever fragments it has available, filling in the gaps with logic, with expectation, with emotion, with everything it knows about the world and about you. Neuroscientist Elizabeth Loftus, whose research on false memory has fundamentally changed how courts, therapists, and cognitive scientists understand the human mind, describes memory as more like a Wikipedia page than a photograph. Anyone can go in and edit it, including you, including people who weren't even there. And here's what makes this genuinely vertiginous. Every time you access a memory, every time you think about it, talk about it, dream about it, you slightly change it. The act of remembering is the act of rewriting. You are not playing back a recording. You are performing a reconstruction. And every performance leaves the material slightly different than before. This means something deeply uncomfortable. Every story you have ever told about your own life, every argument you've recalled, every triumph you've carried, every wound you've returned to, has been edited. Not maliciously, not even consciously, but edited nonetheless, by the simple act of remembering it. Your past is not stored, it is being written continuously, right now. And you are not the only one writing it. In 1974, Elizabeth Loftus ran an experiment that should have made the front page of every newspaper in the world. She showed participants footage of a car accident, standard footage, 2 cars colliding at an intersection. Then she asked a simple question about what they'd seen. One group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Another group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? One word, hit versus smashed. That's all that changed. The smashed group estimated significantly higher speeds than the hit group. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. When both groups were asked 1 week later whether they had seen broken glass in the footage, the smashed group was far more likely to say yes. There was no broken glass in the footage. None. The word smashed, heard once 1 week earlier, had been enough to plant a physical detail that didn't exist. A fabricated sensory memory generated from a single adjective sitting in their minds with the same subjective weight as something they had actually seen. This is called the misinformation effect, and it means something that most people never fully reckon with. Your memories are not just fallible, they are actively vulnerable. Vulnerable to the words other people use to describe an event after it happens. Vulnerable to leading questions. Vulnerable to the news coverage you consumed in the days following. Vulnerable to every conversation you had about what you saw. You were at that family gathering. You remember it clearly. But how much of what you remember is the event itself? And how much is built from every conversation about it that came afterward? Every photograph you looked at? Every story that was told about it at subsequent gatherings? Your memories of your past are partially written by other people, without your knowledge, without your permission. Loftus didn't stop at blurry details. She wanted to know, can you plant an entirely fabricated memory? Not just alter a real one, create a new one from nothing. In one of her most famous studies, participants were given a list of childhood events and asked to describe their memories of them. Some of the events on the list were real, confirmed by the participants' family members. One event on the list was completely fabricated. The participants were told they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, separated from their family, frightened, eventually found by an elderly stranger. It never happened. The family members confirmed it. It was entirely invented, but within a few sessions of being asked to recall and describe the event, 25% of participants did not just accept the false memory. They elaborated on it. They described the color of the stranger's clothing, the feeling of the panic in their chests, the specific section of the mall where they had stood crying, details their own minds had invented to fill in a story that had never existed, and they were certain it was real. 25% of people, given a completely fabricated event, built a detailed, emotional, convincing, specific memory of something that had never happened, and felt absolutely no subjective difference between that memory and their genuine ones. This changes everything you think you know about how reliable a witness you are to your own life. Think about your most formative memories, the ones that explain why you are the way you are, the ones you've used to justify decisions, to understand yourself, to tell other people who you are. How many of those memories are exactly as they happened? How many have been quietly, completely assembled by a brain doing its best to make sense of a past it can only partially access? Here's what you need to understand before this sends you into free fall. Your brain is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to survive. Storing every detail of every moment of your life with perfect fidelity would require computational resources that no biological system could sustain. Your brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. You are consciously aware of perhaps 50 of them. The rest is selected, compressed, discarded. So your brain developed a more efficient strategy. It stores the gist, the emotional core, the meaning, the pattern, and reconstructs the details from context when needed. Cognitive psychologists call this schema theory. Your brain uses existing frameworks, your expectations, your beliefs, your prior experiences to fill in the gaps in any given memory. When you remember eating breakfast as a child, you don't actually retrieve a precise recording of that specific morning. You retrieve the emotional residue of those mornings, and your brain populates it with details drawn from everything you know about what those mornings were like. Usually, this works fine. Usually, the reconstruction is close enough to what actually happened that the difference doesn't matter. But here's where the efficiency breaks down. Your memories are always being filtered through who you are now, not who you were then. Every time you remember something from your childhood, you are not accessing a recording made by a child. You are accessing a reconstruction made by an adult, filtered through decades of subsequent experience, shaped by everything that happened between then and now, colored by the person you became. The you that you remember being is not who you were. It is a character that the person you are now wrote looking backward. Here is something that will genuinely unsettle you if you sit with it long enough. Simply imagining something can make you believe it happened. In a series of experiments studying what researchers call imagination inflation, participants were asked to imagine childhood events that may or may not have occurred. Innocuous things: breaking a window with their hand as a child, riding in a hot air balloon, meeting a famous person at an event. They were not told these events had happened. They were just asked to imagine them in vivid detail for a few minutes. After a single session of imagination, participants reported significantly higher confidence that these events had actually occurred than they had before the imagination exercise. Not just slightly higher, significantly higher. Your brain has genuine difficulty distinguishing between a vivid memory and a vivid imagination. Both feel the same from the inside. Both carry the same subjective sense of being real. This is why trauma therapy requires such extraordinary care. A technique that encourages a patient to vividly imagine a traumatic event in order to process it can, under certain conditions, begin to generate the same neural traces as an actual memory, not identical, but overlapping, blurring. This is why eyewitness testimony collapses under scrutiny at a rate that should alarm every person who has ever served on a jury. The witness is not lying. They are reporting what they genuinely believe they saw. But what they genuinely believe they saw has been partially constructed from what they were asked to imagine, what they were told, and what they needed to be true. Imagination and memory are not opposite functions. They are the same neural machinery running in different directions. When you imagine something vividly enough, you are laying down the same kind of neurological trace that a real experience would leave. Not identical, but close enough, in many cases, to blur. And the more emotional the imagining, the stronger the trace, which means the things you most desperately wish had gone differently are also the things most vulnerable to unconscious revision. Here is the cruel irony at the heart of all of this. The memories you are most confident about are not necessarily the most accurate ones. Multiple decades of research on what's called confidence accuracy correlation have found something consistent and deeply counterintuitive: the feeling of certainty about a memory, the subjective sense that you absolutely, clearly, without question, remember what happened, is essentially unrelated to whether the memory is accurate. Confidence and accuracy in memory are two separate systems, and they rarely travel together. The reason is this: confidence in a memory is generated by fluently and easily the memory comes to mind, how vivid it feels, how complete the narrative seems, how emotionally resonant the details are. And all of those qualities, vividness, completeness, narrative coherence, emotional resonance, can be produced by a false memory just as effectively as a real one, sometimes more effectively, because your brain fills in a false memory with exactly the details that make it feel most meaningful and complete. The most dangerous memories are the ones that feel most certain, because certainty doesn't mean accuracy. It means the story is coherent, and your brain is very, very good at generating coherent stories from incomplete or entirely fabricated material. Let's talk about the memories you would swear on anything are accurate, the ones attached to massive public events, where you were when something happened that changed everything, the ones called flashbulb memories, named for the way they seem to capture a single perfect photographic moment of personal experience. Researchers have studied these extensively, and what they found is one of the most deflating results in the history of psychology. Immediately after major public events, researchers asked participants to write detailed accounts of where they were, who they were with, what they were doing, and how they heard the news. Then they contact those same participants months or years later and ask them again. The accounts diverge, not slightly, in many cases, dramatically. People remember being with someone who records show they couldn't have been with. They remember hearing the news in a location they demonstrably weren't in. They remember an emotional reaction that contradicts what they wrote down in the hours after it happened. And when confronted with their original written accounts, many participants insist that the original record must be wrong, not their memory, even when shown their own handwriting from the day it happened. The subjective certainty of a flashbulb memory is so powerful that people will reject documentary evidence in its favor. This is not a defect in unusual people. This is a feature of normal human memory operating exactly as designed. The emotional intensity of the moment creates a sense of photographic clarity, but the photograph was never taken. What feels like a perfect snapshot is still a reconstruction, one that, like all reconstructions, drifts with each retelling, each retouching, each time you return to it in the years since. Let's go back to something I said at the beginning that I don't think landed hard enough. Your memories of your past are partially written by other people, not metaphorically, literally. In a phenomenon called social contagion of memory, researchers have shown that simply hearing someone else describe an event you both witnessed is enough to alter your memory of that event. Their version infects your version. Details they mention begin to appear in your subsequent recall. Details they don't mention begin to fade from yours. This happens in families constantly. The story of a particular holiday, a particular argument, a particular moment that everyone present remembers differently. and each family member is certain their version is the accurate one. Each version has been shaped year after year by who told the story at the next gathering, what details they emphasize, what they left out. The family mythology and the individual memory are the same process operating at different scales. And here is where it becomes genuinely alarming in the context of relationships. In a close relationship, your partner's narrative of events gradually shapes your own memory of those events. Over time, the shared story of a couple, the way they describe their own history to themselves and to others, contains elements from both individual memories merged in ways that neither partner could accurately disentangle. This is not a problem. This is normal. But it means that when relationships end, the memories that remain are partially written by someone who is no longer there to co-author them. And the bitterness, the grief, the relief, the anger, all of that is now doing the editing alone. The person you remember your ex being is partially the person your ex told you they were. And now the only editor left is you, with all the bias that comes with it. There is a specific type of false memory error that researchers call source monitoring failure, and it is happening to you constantly. Your brain stores memories without reliably tagging where they came from, whether something was experienced or imagined, seen in real life or in a film, told to you or lived by you. The content of the memory is stored reasonably well. The source is often lost. This is why you sometimes remember a memory that you later realize was actually a scene from a book you read as a teenager, or a story your parent told you about your own childhood so many times that it became experientially your own. It is why you sometimes find yourself certain you said something or didn't say something in a conversation when the other person has an entirely different account. Not because one of you is lying, because the source monitoring system failed. Your brain stored the content, but misattributed the origin. This becomes particularly complicated with repeated events. If you experience something similar many times, family dinners, school days, arguments of the same shape, your brain doesn't store each instance. It stores the composite, the average, the schema that covers all of them. And then when you try to remember a specific Tuesday in 1994, you don't retrieve that Tuesday. You retrieve the average of all Tuesdays, populated with details drawn from the most emotionally salient examples. The specific and the general collapse into each other. And the result feels, from the inside, exactly like a precise, specific, real memory. If everything we've discussed so far has made you uncomfortable, this section should make you genuinely alarmed. Eyewitness testimony is the single most persuasive form of evidence in a criminal trial, and it is among the least reliable. The Innocence Project, an organization that uses DNA evidence to exonerate wrongfully convicted individuals, has reviewed hundreds of cases of wrongful conviction in the United States alone. In approximately 70% of those cases, mistaken eyewitness testimony was a contributing factor, not fabricated testimony, not perjury. Genuine, sincere, confident eyewitness accounts from people who were absolutely certain of what they had seen, and they were wrong. The reasons are everything we've already discussed: weapon focus effect, misinformation effect, post-event information contaminating the original encoding, leading questions during police interviews, the passage of time, the pressure of a courtroom. And then there is the lineup problem. When a witness views a lineup of potential suspects, they are often making a relative judgment, not an absolute one. They are not asking, does this person match what I remember seeing? They are asking, which of these people best matches what I remember seeing? Those are profoundly different questions with profoundly different error rates. And the system was designed around the first question, while the human mind is built to answer the second. People have spent years, decades in prison for crimes they did not commit, because a sincere witness, under pressure, reconstructed a face and sincerely placed it where it had never been. Memory is not just an internal matter, it has stakes. Here is something most people don't know. You probably have no reliable memories from before the age of 3, possibly 4, possibly even 5. This is called childhood amnesia. And despite the name, it is not a failure of memory. It is a feature. The hippocampus, the brain structure most critical for converting experiences into long-term memories, is not sufficiently developed in the earliest years of life to support the kind of explicit narrative memory that adults rely on. But most people believe they have memories from before this age, and almost universally, when those early memories are investigated, when family members are consulted, when photographs are examined, when the basic logistics are checked, they turn out to be reconstructions, assembled from photographs seen many times, stories told by parents, fragments of older events mistakenly assigned to earlier ones. You don't remember being 2 years old, but you may have assembled a convincing memory of it from everything you've been told and shown about that time. And this matters because those earliest memories, or pseudo-memories, carry enormous emotional weight. They are often used to explain fundamental aspects of personality, of attachment style, of deep psychological patterns. If those memories are constructions, and the evidence suggests many of them are, then the stories we tell about how we became who we are may be substantially fictional, not in their emotional truth, but in their literal content. This is the section where it gets most contested, and I'm going to be careful. For decades, there has been an enormous and ongoing scientific debate about what happens to memory in the context of severe trauma. One influential framework, particularly prominent in therapeutic contexts from the 1980s and 1990s, proposed that the mind could repress traumatic memories, push them entirely out of conscious awareness as a protective mechanism where they could remain inaccessible for years or decades before being recovered. The science on this is genuinely complicated. On one side, there is strong evidence that trauma affects memory encoding and retrieval. Traumatic experiences are often remembered in fragments, with gaps, with distorted timelines, with sensory details that feel overwhelming while narrative coherence collapses. This is well documented. The stress hormones released during trauma, cortisol, adrenaline, have measurable effects on the hippocampus and the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center. On the other side, Elizabeth Loftus and other researchers have documented extensively that the practice of encouraging patients to recover repressed memories through suggestive therapy techniques produced a disturbing number of false memories, memories of events that could be demonstrated conclusively not to have occurred. In some cases, memories of events that were physically impossible. The scientific consensus today is nuanced. Traumatic experiences can be difficult to access. Memory for trauma can be fragmented and nonlinear, but the existence of wholesale repression, in which an entire traumatic event is completely blocked from consciousness and then accurately recovered years later, is not supported by the evidence. What is supported is that suggestive techniques can produce false memories of traumatic events with devastating consequences for everyone involved. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It does not resolve neatly, but it is what the evidence says. Here's something slightly different, slightly more hopeful, and in its own way, just as strange. As memories age, they tend to get better, not more accurate, better. Researchers studying what's called the fading affect bias have found that negative emotions associated with memories fade faster than positive ones. The emotional sting of difficult memories diminishes more rapidly than the warmth of good ones. This is why childhood, for most adults who had reasonably safe childhoods, seems bathed in a light it probably didn't always have. Why the good old days get better with each passing year. Why the past consistently feels simpler, warmer, more certain than the present, regardless of what the present actually is. Your memory is not just reconstructing events, it is improving them. It is gently, persistently, across years and decades, editing out the mundane and the painful and amplifying the meaningful and the warm. This is, on balance, probably good for mental health, but it also means that nostalgia, that feeling of aching warmth for a time you remember as better than now, is partly an artifact of how memory works. The past that calls to you is not the past that was. It is the past that has been processed, refined, and edited by a mind that prefers certain versions of events to others. You are not remembering what happened. You are remembering what you have made of what happened over time, quietly, without knowing you were doing it. One more layer, and this one might be the strangest. When you remember something with other people, when you collectively recall a shared event, you don't just compare notes, you contaminate each other. In collaborative recall, the most confident voice in the group tends to dominate. The person who speaks first, most clearly, with most certainty, their version becomes the shared version. Other participants' individual memories begin to align with it. Details that contradict the dominant version fade. Details that support it solidify. The group memory that emerges from collaborative recall is not the average of individual memories. It is a social construction shaped by who spoke loudest and first, by the group's need for consensus, by what version of events is most comfortable for the group to hold. This is why families remember events the way the most dominant family member remembers them, why couples end up with one partner's version of their shared history, why organizations develop institutional memories that serve certain people's interests better than others, and why interrogation rooms, courtrooms, and therapy sessions, any setting where a memory is recalled in the presence of a person with an agenda, are such dangerous environments for the accuracy of what gets said. The memory that exists in your head when you walk in is not always the memory that exists when you walk out. Here is where all of this lands. Your identity, the coherent story you tell about who you are, where you came from, what happened to you, and why you are the way you are, is constructed substantially from memory. And memory, as we have established, is reconstruction, which means that the self is, to a significant degree, a story that is continuously being revised. This doesn't mean you're not real. It doesn't mean your experiences didn't happen. It doesn't mean the pain was not pain or the joy was not joy. But it means that the narrative you carry, the autobiography of yourself that you use to make sense of your present and navigate your future, is a construction, not a transcript. The psychologist Dan McAdams has spent his career studying what he calls narrative identity, the stories people construct about themselves to create a sense of coherence, meaning, and continuity across time. His finding is consistent. Human beings are not primarily bone-driven creatures. We are story-driven creatures. We don't remember what happened. We remember what we made it mean, and what we made it mean changes as we change, as we need different things from our past, as the person we are requires different backstory to make sense. This is not a flaw. This is how humans work, but it carries a responsibility. If your past is partially a story you are writing, then you have more agency over it than you might have thought. The traumatic event that has defined you may be real. The pain it caused was real, but the meaning you have assigned to it, the way it has been woven into the story of who you are and what you are capable of, that is not fixed. That was written, and it can be revised. Not the event, the meaning, not the wound, the story about what the wound makes you. So, what do you actually do with this? First, hold your memories more loosely, especially the ones you are most certain of, especially the ones that form the foundation of a story about yourself that keeps you stuck, especially the ones where you are the clear, unambiguous victim or the clear, unambiguous hero. Those are the most likely to have been edited. Second, when you are in conflict with another person about what happened and you are certain you are right, consider the genuine possibility that you are both telling the truth as you experienced it, not as a diplomatic gesture, as a neurological reality. Two people can experience the same event and reconstruct it so differently that their accounts appear to describe two different events. Neither is necessarily lying. Third, be cautious about the memories you make. This sounds strange. How do you make a memory? But we know now that the conditions under which an event is encoded affect what gets retained. Presence matters. Attention matters. The more fully you are actually there, not photographing the moment, not narrating it for future social media consumption, the more complete the encoding. The memories that sustain people through difficult times are not the memories of experiences they documented. They are the memories of experiences they were fully inside. And fourth, perhaps most importantly, understand that your past is not finished. Every time you remember something, you have an opportunity to relate to it differently. Not to change what happened, that is fixed, but to change what it means, to bring a more compassionate, more curious, more informed understanding to the reconstruction. The past that shapes you is not the past that happened. It is the past as you carry it. And how you carry it is, to a greater degree than most people realize, a choice. Before we close, I want to sit with a tension that the science doesn't fully resolve. If memory is this unreliable, if reconstruction is this vulnerable, this malleable, this subject to contamination and revision, then how do we function? How do we maintain a sense of continuous self if the record of that self is so fluid? The answer is we need to believe our memories more than they deserve. The functional illusion of an accurate, stable past is what makes a coherent present possible. If you genuinely internalize the full implications of what we've discussed today, if you held every memory with the exact degree of skepticism the evidence warrants, you would struggle to maintain the sense of continuous, consistent self that is necessary for ordinary psychological functioning. You need the story. You need it to feel true, even when it isn't perfectly accurate. The philosopher Paul Ricoeur argued that the self is fundamentally a narrative self, that what we call identity is not a fixed entity, but an ongoing interpretive project. We are always in the process of making sense of who we are by constructing a story of where we came from. That story is the self. And a story, by definition, is not a transcript. The science of false memory doesn't ask you to stop trusting your memories. It asks you to hold them with a little more humility, a little more curiosity, a little more willingness to consider that the story you've been telling might be ready for a revision, not because it was never true, but because you might be ready for a version that serves you better.